I'm Lisa Kefauver, author and podcast host of Grief is a Sneaky Bitch. And this is my amazing collaborator, Nina Rodriguez, who is the podcast host of Grief and Light and the community that's involved. We're so happy to have you here. Nina, it's so great to see you.
Likewise, it's always an honor to be here with you, and I'm so excited about part two of this conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to tell folks if you've joined us before, if you're watching us now? First of all, Stephen, hello. Thanks for joining. As you
Welcome,
join
Stephen.
today, write comments, ask questions. But Nina, do you want to tell folks what part one was
Sure.
about and really just catch us up on the series?
Absolutely. So this is a three-part series and it sort of builds on each other. We had the first one on July 29th. So if you were here for that, I would love for you to drop an emoji and tell us maybe if some of the questions that we discussed is something that you practiced between then and now. Back then, we were exploring the theme of curiosity and leaning into life's questions. And the premise is, what if the questions themselves were a place where life can begin to open up again? And what if we didn't need the answers to move forward? Just living into the questions, what does that look like? What does that sound like? And how can we make it a practice in our lives? Today, we're going to be focusing on shifting our stories. So, from curiosity to creativity, how do we shift what Lisa calls, and she'll tell us more about those, our sticky stories, those stories that kind of get stuck and they were the ones that helped us survive, but they're not necessarily the ones that are going to help us move forward after some time. So, what stories are you still carrying? This is the invitation. What stories are you still carrying? And what might you write instead? So,
Mm,
how can you shift those stories to something that maybe serves you better in this point in your life? And then the third part of the series is going to focus on possibility. This is going to take place on September 9th, and it's going to focus on meeting life differently. So, how can we let life surprise us? So, I hope you will join us for all of those. If you missed the first one, just send us a message. We will gladly send you the replay. But today we're going to be focusing on shifting our stories. And dear Lisa, tell us a little bit about what is a sticky story and how
yeah,
do we shift that?
yeah. Just hearing it back, what we're going to be talking about, what we've been talking about, just gets me so excited. So if you're joining us live or you're watching this on a replay, I hope you'll walk away from this series feeling more capable of meeting the moment, meeting your life differently in this season of change. So we touched on it a little bit last time if you've watched it. So sorry for those of you who were there here the first time, but I think it's important to think about the fact that all of us have what I call sticky stories. This is just a label I've developed over time. I am trained in narrative therapy, so very much aware about the power of words. We talked about this idea that words make worlds last time. And the truth is, all of us have what I call sticky stories. Those are stories that we have about ourselves, about our identity, about what we can expect from the world, about what we can't expect from the world. And we learn that over time through culture, through friends, through family, through the political systems, the economic systems that we live in. And as you were indicating earlier, Nina, which I love that you brought that up, many of us have these stories. They're often limiting, they're often harsh, they're often um, maybe self critical. But at some point, those stories that we had maybe served us. Maybe they helped us survive a difficult family, they maybe helped us survive the death of a loved one. So the stories, I think, even though I ask us to interrogate it, and today we're going to talk about how do we creatively interrogate the stories that might be keeping us stuck in times of transition. I never like to, always never good, bad, the stories that we have. Our stories served us. And the practices that we're talking about in the Summer Shift series is really asking or inviting all of us to be curious. That was our theme last time. Be curious. What are the stories that are operating in the background of your mind? And how are they serving you or not? And those are those sticky stories. So creativity is just a way to remain open and to be curious, to welcome the possibilities, which you talked about that theme, and we'll talk about in part three. That there's a version of ourselves, that there's a version of our story, that there's a version of our worldview that is waiting for us on the other side of a creative approach to our story in our lives.
That's beautiful. And I see here that Stephen commented, hello, I enjoyed part one. I am learning not knowing is safe and exciting. That is huge. And thank you for sharing that one,
Yeah,
because not knowing could be so intimidating and the source of a lot of grief and sorrow and stress and anxiety and just
yeah,
not feeling all too great about what's going to happen or what may happen. But leaning into that with curiosity, with creativity makes all the world of difference. So thank you for that. That's
yeah.
wonderful.
I was thinking about, and we talked about this offline, but we're going to bring folks in line who are joining us and hopefully joining us later in the conversation or watching the replay, is that we use the word creativity a lot. Like we sort of throw it around. And it got me curious, no surprise there, to go Google up how do we define, like, what is the dictionary definition of the word creativity? Because I know now I do call myself a creative, but I think there were years where I felt very much like that wasn't a title I was allowed to, that it was
Mhm.
reserved for certain people, which in itself is a story, isn't it? Right.
Right.
And one of the things that I found that I thought was really interesting is when you look in sort of Western dictionaries, creativity has a lot of themes around generating and producing,
Mhm.
which feels very culturally context, right? Like that feels like a very Western idea. So in the West, sort of the general definitions, creativity is the ability to generate novel and valuable ideas or works through the exercise of imagination. And the products of creativity might be classified as either intangible or physical. And it goes on to talk about it being a way to find new solutions to problems or to solve problems. And I don't know about you, I don't, it's not that I don't love that. I think that's true, but it got me thinking about the ways in which that still puts the onus on the person being creative to get to somewhere, to not, like
Right.
Stephen said, live in the not knowing, be in the wonder, be in the discovery. It's still like you're only creative if you're producing, if you're generating, if you're solving.
Right.
And I've been reading some, like, if we think about sort of pre Renaissance age, not to nerd out, but like in the olden days, we sort of thought about creativity as discovery.
Right.
And that's how the definitions were. And just that switch, like for me, opens up a way I can relate to creativity that maybe I couldn't if it was like about producing some outcome. How have
Yes.
you thought about creativity? I mean, you're a podcaster, you've created a lot of things in your life. How do you think about creativity when it comes to giving yourself permission to take risks or try new things or shift your story? Yeah.
I love that question. And it's something you touched on in the first live that we had, where you mentioned the anti productivity of grief as a way to lean into curiosity as a form of discovery, right? And that's the point that we're talking about, is that discovery. So that was in the context of grief, but it's also just in the context of, like you said, discovery in general, but also self discovery. Like, what does my own voice sound like, right? As a podcaster, for example, since you touched on that, I had no idea. And if you listen back to, like, let's say my first episode, I thought I had to speak a certain way and sound a certain way, and it didn't even sound like me. So when we start, we have to give ourselves that permission, to put it bluntly, permission to suck and just like not be good at it and be a little awkward, a little cringy. And cringe is part of that process of self discovery. So by episode 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on, you start learning what your own voice sounds like,
Yeah.
what your own style is. And it starts becoming that practice, it starts becoming your own. And I think that's really, really important. And, also in the context of grief, there's so much that shifts that it's like we don't even know what we may need in a moment, what we're supposed to be doing. And so it's like, how do we crack that door open to discovery, self discovery, in when your entire foundation has shifted, right? So those are, part of it is like what we discussed before, leaning into the questions, and then what? So we leaned into the questions, and then what, right? How do we kind
We
of,
get creative, we
how do
play,
we
we
get creative?
experiment. Yeah.
And so much of that is precisely that, it's play.
Yeah, yeah. And
What
you
about
have to be
yourself?
willing to suck, as you said, and you have to be
Yes.
willing to know that, oh, that was even the things that mostly we label as failures, which is simply a story, by the way,
Mhm.
that we tell ourselves, is like there's information there. Oh, I liked this part. I didn't like that part. Oh, I need to have more practice at this. It shifts your experience and your willingness to take risks to lean into that unknowing place, as Stephen was talking about. How it's funny when you're on a theme in your life and then wherever you go,
Yes.
everything you open up, something is there. And today I was reading the notes here on Substack because I just love this space, just so many creative thinkers. And I came upon this guy who posted something about this notion of discovery that I thought was such a great metaphor. I think his handle, I'll give him a shout out. I don't know anything about him. I don't know how he showed up in my feed, but his handle is the Old Gray Thinker.
Oh, I love that.
And he said, my neighbor asked why I still use paper maps. And his response was, because GPS tells you where to go, but maps show you where you could go.
Wow.
One is navigation, the other is possibility. And at my age, I've had enough of being directed. I want to see all the roads I haven't taken yet spread out like promises.
That's beautiful. Well, shout out to, what was it? The great,
The Old Gray Thinker. So
oh, the great thinker.
shout out to him, but it makes me think about this theme that we're talking about today,
Mhm.
because it does require, we theme one was curiosity, but the reason I think we both felt really compelled to bring creativity to the theme of our shifting stories today, it's the then what. We can remain open, but we are such instinctual creatures. We go for most of us have stories we don't even know are stories. We just think of them
Right.
as truth with a capital T. Right? That this is just who I am. This is, and we can talk later about some activities to interrupt those. But most
Yes.
of us have the stories of I am fill in the blank, and usually it's something limiting. And how do we get past that? Well, we have to get creative, because first we have to notice that we're telling the story. And we can
Right.
talk about some creative activities to notice the stuck stories in our lives. But then we have to start playing around creatively with how do we try out, like you're trying on new outfits or new wardrobes or new hairdos,
Right.
different stories, and see which ones feel more in alignment, which ones open the roads of possibilities, which ones close the roads of possibilities, right?
And a
And
lot of that is doing it in a way that, like you said, there's no one particular outcome you're trying to get to. It's more experimentation and that self-discovery. And I want to turn the question on you in the sense that you are somebody that teaches narrative therapy, you work with your clients with narrative therapy. Um, but you also apply it to yourself and to your own,
yeah,
the different challenges that you've had to face, your own shifts in your own life. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you apply it yourself and what it looks like in practice, if you're okay with that.
yeah, of course. I think a lot. Yeah, I have been working with narrative therapeutic approach for decades now, and of course, when you work with it, it just absolutely aligns with your own life. In fact, I fell in love with narrative therapy in graduate school because it felt so in alignment with what I knew, how I was already seeing the world. I think it can take a lot of forms, but for me, writing, and when I say writing, sometimes it's writing for public consumption, sometimes it's writing in my own journal, sometimes it's writing, but it's more about how I speak to myself, how I interrupt the way that I speak to myself, how I interrupt when I'm speaking to somebody else and I catch myself. So for me, it's writing, but there's other ways to play with narrative for sure. It's poetry, and we can talk about that too. So I've used narrative as a way to um, interrupt the stuck seasons of my lives, or the seasons where I felt weighed down by things personally. Of course, I use it with my clients, and I'm happy to share that. It often starts with curiosity. I mean, it starts with the theme we talked about last week. It starts with when I find myself in a place where I might label it as depression or stuck or lonely or something that has kind of an all or nothing label.
Mhm.
I start trying to pay attention to how is it that I'm talking about my life experience at the time. And I look out for those sticky words, which we talked about last time, if you were here for our conversation last time. I
But feel
look
free
out,
to share them again,
okay,
once
so
again. So we,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I end up looking out for the should, shouldn't, always, never, but. But I think I'll add another way I notice I'm in a sticky story, and that I need a creative way to shift my perspective because this story is no longer serving me. It's when I start to hear myself say a lot of sentences that start with I am,
Mm.
right? So for a lot of us, we've learned, and this is from culture, we've learned to label ourselves. I am depressed. I am alone. I am a loser. I am bad at math. I am, from the very deep and heavy to the very frivolous.
Right.
I hear this all the time. I'm a bad artist. I'm a bad, musician, a bad singer, or whatever it is. And for some, I think they might think, "Oh, it's just a word, it's just a title. Like, don't dismiss the fact that I'm lonely, or I'm depressed, or maybe I don't have a good singing voice. Words make worlds and they have power. So I've learned to interrupt and notice that, oh, I've said I am. Well, why is I am problematic? I am is in totality.
Right.
I am means this is who I am at my fundamental core. There's no other way to be. There's no possibility of a different experience. It describes my existence, and there's no distance. So part of how I use these narrative skills to sort of shift the sticky stories in my life is I catch myself and I do a lot of, this is really basic, but I do a lot of reframing.
Mhm.
So when I say I am lonely or I am, and then I throw in one of the other sticky words, always alone,
Right.
right? Because usually the sticky words come together. I wrote a
Right.
post today, and I talked about a recent internal dialogue that I had where I think 4 of the 5 sticky words all showed up in like 2 seconds, and I was like, okay, inner narrator, I see what you're doing there. So it might sound something like I'm always alone, or I'm always the one who's, and so we're I am, and then we're always. Okay, so how might we creatively play with that? What the first is to ask a question for our last time. Is that absolutely 100% true all the time?
Mm. Like
Chances
capital
are
T
no.
true, right?
Yeah,
Chances
capital
are
T
no.
true. Chances are no.
Right.
Can I look for some unique outcomes or some exception stories about the times that I wasn't? Okay. So that starts to put a crack in it. But a different way to even play with it, if you don't want to explore the questions, or if you're still really dogmatic and you want to be like, yes, it's always true, is to say, what if you tried, today I am feeling alone?
Yes.
Or recently, I am feeling depressed. Okay, well, that's not a blanket statement anymore. Now there's some possibility it's time sensitive because it's today or recently. And also, it's a feeling. Well, a feeling isn't who you are as an identity, a feeling is a feeling. And we know feelings change. Feelings can linger for a long time if we have a story. Emotions come and go in 90 seconds. Feelings hang around because we have a story.
Right.
So that's one way, just for an example, that I play with that. And once I get some space, I'll do this with clients, but again, I do it with myself. I imagine thinking about that hard outcome, that hard story. I'm alone. I'm always alone. I'm depressed, whatever the story is. I'm anxious. Um, as like somebody sitting in a seat across from you. So, like, or I'll say something like, anxiety is present today, or anxiety is
Mhm.
really hanging around today. I'm not anxiety. Anxiety is hanging around today. Well, now we have distance. So now I'm playing with anxiety as if it's a person or an experience or an energy outside of me. So I can be in conversation with anxiety. So sometimes when I say I'm writing, I'm like, I'm in, I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to that story that I have and
Yes.
figuring out my relationship with it. So I hope that answers your question about how I
Absolutely.
play with it. Yeah.
And it reminds me a bit about how language influences so much of our belief system, just even the structure of language to nerd out a little bit here. But in English,
Yeah.
so much is not just the belief, but a identity. So
Yes.
I am fill in the blank. And that's just the way we sort of speak. And if you hear other languages, like I'm thinking in Spanish, for example, it's I feel. I
Yes.
feel, me siento mal, like I feel unwell, or I feel joy, but there's a bit of a separation between who you are and
Yes.
what you're experiencing. And I feel like
Yes.
what a lot of what you're saying is creating that bit of distance so that we can gain perspective as to how we can move forward. Is this who I am? Is this
Yes.
inherently capital T true? Is this unchangeable? Is this all or nothing and nothing's
Yeah.
ever going to change?
Yeah.
Or is this a season, a moment, a feeling, an emotion that, like everything else, is going to pass, and
Yeah.
not to say,
Yeah.
not to say passes and, necessarily related to death or loss. I'm saying more
Yes.
like just transient, something that's
Yeah.
going to change. So I've also heard other languages, and I cannot remember which one right now, that they say, sadness is it lives in me, or sadness is visiting me, or something to that
Yes.
effect, where it's
Yeah.
here as a visitor, like you said. You put it in a chair across from you and you create that distance and you acknowledge it, you see it, but it does not become you. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important to have that perspective, because it does empower us to shift the
Yes.
story that may be feeling very loud in that and present in that moment. So I love
Yeah.
that narrative therapy in general talks about that, and also the perspective of just how can we create distance between this perhaps overwhelming heavy emotion or challenge or
Yeah.
whatever it is that I'm moving through in this moment, whether that be joyous or not, like how can I relate to this and not
Yes.
become it necessarily.
I love that you use that language, and that's exactly right. This isn't, by the way, toxic positivity. So this isn't denying the fact that you're feeling anxiety in your body, but I'd rather, instead of saying, I am just an anxious person, which is like a
Right.
declarative statement, you learn to notice, what does anxiety feel like in my body? I know it feels like it's a tight chest. For me, it feels like a lot of like buzzing energy in my
Yes.
body and my mind. So if I can say anxiety is showing up or anxiety is hanging around, and then I can notice it, then I can actually be in relationship to it and listen to my body, which usually for me means I need movement, I need to be in nature, maybe I need to sway or put on some music, right? So it's not to deny, or you're feeling sad or you're feeling, right? It's helping you, like, if you're a photographer, it's like helping you widen the aperture of
Mhm.
what you're taking in, because sometimes when we have these I am statements or these stories about I'm a loser, I'm stuck, is it closes us in too much.
Right.
And we can take these creative approaches with these little activities, and we can maybe talk about some of them today, where we can kind of widen the aperture. I want to say one other thing, because I think if you're not dealing with, let's say, a stuck story, maybe around the death, loss, or grief, which is often what you and I are talking about, but you're in a season of your life where you're in a stuck story where you maybe want to get more creative in your life, or you're thinking
Mhm.
about a new career, or you're thinking about a transition. One of the things I hear people say often, I almost said always, I hear people say often in my one-on-one work with people, and just in my friends in my life, is there's a lot of I'm not good at that.
Mm.
Like, I've recently taken up painting for the first time in my life, and everybody's like, oh, I couldn't do that, I'm not good at that. And my interruption or my invitation or the game that I play with people is like, how about I don't have a lot of practice with that?
Right.
Okay, well, of course you're not good at painting. How many hours have you invested in painting? Oh, well, I haven't done any since, third grade in elementary school. Okay, well, you know, even Van Gogh had to put in some hours, right? Or whatever.
Right.
So I think there's this way that our stuck stories can show up even in these really subtle ways. And if you're not really ready to interrogate the stories about your role in your dysfunctional family growing up or something heavier, you could start playing around and being creative with playing with the stories that maybe are getting you stuck in more subtle ways, or maybe in less high stakes ways, around hobbies you might want to try or new shifts in careers that you might want to get involved in. If you say, I don't have a lot of practice versus I am bad at it. I literally had this conversation with a client this morning who mentioned singing, and then she said, I'm a bad singer. And I was like, have you ever sung before? And she's like, no. And I was like, okay, so how about I don't have a lot of practice singing? I'm like, you're speaking to me, so you have a voice.
You have a
So I'm
voice, yeah.
assuming you can sing, right? So,
Right.
so anyway, so that's, I think, one way we can think about using creativity and the using creativity to shift the stories we're telling about ourselves that open up a possibility of some new possible way of relating to yourself and to the world.
And I think that's really important when you're facing a pivot in life, whether it's chosen or
Yeah,
something that just happened. But for example, taking a career pivot as an
yeah,
example, something I've done multiple times throughout my life.
me
And a
too.
lot of it is we are so taught and rewarded for identifying with what we do, to the point that if you meet somebody new, one of the first
Yeah,
questions that ever comes up is, what do you do for a living?
yes,
I despise that question, not because I don't care. I think people do fascinating things, but there's that assumption or presumption that it is who you are. What you
yeah,
do is who you are. And we use this in our everyday language like it's just a Tuesday, like it's just the most
yes,
normal thing in the world. When a lot of times, especially in the times that we're living in, that so much is shifting, pun intended,
yes,
so much in particularly, like, let's say, in the corporate world and in the job landscape, career landscape, and all the things. So using that as an example, right? Let's say you want to go in a different direction, but you don't know where to start. That's usually, it's like, I've only been, a marketer my whole life. I don't know where to start. Or I've only been a doctor my whole life and I don't know where to, what
yeah,
else would I do if I'm not a doctor? Who am I, right? Who
yeah,
else can I be? And so cracking that door open again with the questions, a lot of it is, let's say all your bills are paid, let's say all
Yeah.
your needs are taken care of, and you can close your eyes and dream up something that you would just love to do. If
Yeah.
you had all the time in the world and all your bills were paid and everything was taken care of, what would that thing
Yeah.
be, right? And so, where a lot of people think they don't know a direction forward, turns out to be they haven't allowed themselves to think of
Mhm.
themselves as anything other than what they currently are or where they currently are. So,
Exactly.
just kind of
Yeah.
removing that sense of identity, removing that sense of limitation, self-imposed or learned, taught, whatever,
Yeah.
and exploring a little bit, like, what would I be doing? There's always an answer if you allow yourself to say
Yes.
it, if you allow yourself to
Yes.
say it out loud. And sometimes it has nothing to do with what you've ever done. It could be, I love pottery, I love bike riding, I love
Yeah.
whatever, right? Fill in the blank. And when you start thinking about those things that have always been there, but you just didn't give them the time or the space or the permission to exist, then you lean into those with curiosity and openness, and you find little ways, like tiny little
Yeah.
everyday ways to express that curiosity, to get creative, to start playing with it. Like you said, this person that you spoke to has a voice. So
Yeah.
what would that voice sound like in a certain song? Like put on a song, right? But just allowing yourself to sometimes even feel silly doing it,
Yeah.
like feel cringy. I always say cringe is part of the process. Cringe is how you find yourself. Cringe is how you
Exactly.
become that other version, because you're not going to be great at it
Yeah.
initially. And that's
Yeah.
part of how it's supposed to be.
I want to
And
reclaim cringe from the whatever
we're
generation
taking it
says
back.
cringe. We're taking it back and we're using it. Like I'm fully claiming the cringe because
Yeah.
cringe shows to me courage, bravery, risk
Yes.
taking, creativity, openness, curiosity, discovery. Who wouldn't want to be associated with those
Right.
things? Like yeah,
No, and I wanted to mention, I recently had a conversation with this person who went through a really significant loss in their life. And they told me, I feel like I'm suffocating, but I'm on medication and I can't cry, is what they said to me.
yeah,
And my heart went out to them. And after some conversations, I said, I asked them, do you feel that crying is the only way to express? Do you think crying is the only? And they said, well,
yeah,
yeah, because I'm sad and I just won't come out because of this medication. And I said, well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you, like, on
yeah,
that front how to work that. But I can tell you that something in you is craving something different, is craving openness, is craving release, is craving
yes.
that
Expression.
this expression, discovery, all these things. And crying is just one form of
Yeah,
this expression. So do you write? Do you draw? Do you do
yeah,
something else? You don't necessarily need to limit this form of expression to crying if that's
yeah,
not necessarily available to you right now. And that's perfectly okay. Not everybody has to cry,
yeah,
let's say, for
yeah,
to process things. You will often find, or often found, that let's say you start doodling.
yeah,
I'm not asking you to draw. It's just doodle. Just
yeah,
color the edges of a paper, a piece of paper, and we'll talk about some of these practices later. But just do something
yeah,
that allows this emotion, this need, this desire for something different to move through you. Give it a place to go, give it a place to have that expression. And that's part of this creative discovery, creativity theme
yeah.
that we're talking about.
I I think it's such an important uh, point that you made to that person, and for those listening or watching later with us live or watching later is, um, I think starting somewhere, and that's even an experience where that person had a story in their mind
Yeah.
that crying is the only way to honor or express their sadness.
Mhm.
And we don't even know that that's a story until we say it to somebody, and then somebody asks us a curious question, which is what the gift that you gave that person. What else could it look like? And I think that's why I personally love writing so much, but it could be any expressive thing. It makes me think of, Joan Didion, whose
Mhm.
autobiography, The Year of Magical Thinking, I think is on everybody's top list of books on grief. She is a writer, but I don't think you have to be what you would label yourself as a writer because, again, we're just like we're all singers. If we have a voice, we're all writers if we can type or write. She said, and I just want to, I usually quote it, but I wrote it down today because I wanted to make sure I got it really accurate. Joan Didion said, I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see, and what it means, what I want and what I fear.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. I think often we're waiting for like the big tears. We're waiting for the cathartic therapeutic session. And certainly, I'm sure, like, I know you coach people, like I work with people. Sometimes they do happen in sessions, but they can happen anywhere. And so instead of saying, well, I don't want to write my autobiography, or I'm not a journaler. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I was like, do you own a pencil in the back of an envelope?
Right.
Okay, start writing, or a Word document if you want to type it out. Because I do think that there is something about the doodling, the drawing, the writing, that if you can allow yourself the safety, and I think, this is one of the activities, we do all the time. And I know, if you all know Suleika Jaouad, who's an incredible writer, has written Between Two Kingdoms and the Book of Alchemy. I know she shared this sort of timed writing idea too. But if you just set a timer and give yourself, nobody's going to read this. At the end, if I want, I can rip up this envelope and throw it in the trash. There's no stakes. You'll be surprised at what you discover about the stories that you have that are keeping you stuck, the dreams that you've been too scared to tell anybody about, right? It doesn't have to be prose, it doesn't have to be poetry, it doesn't have to be for public consumption, but it's just about doing it. And the thing is, the more you try these creative approaches, and maybe, we can go through some of these for folks, give them some ideas and activities. I think some people think I'm going to spend it. It's like, oh, I've done my painting. I've spent my creative energy. And of course, I think about writer Maya Angelou, who, again, another incredible hero of our times, reminded us that you can't use up creativity. And the actual truth is, the more you use it, the more you have. And
Yes.
that's kind of a gift too. It's like, oh, good. I get to, and I'm experiencing this in this season of my life. The more I've been painting, the more I've been wanting to do drawing, the more I've been drawing, the more I've been wanting to play around with movement. Then I've been wanting to create products. Like,
Yes.
it has that movement. Has that been your experience, or are there some activities that you love to do when you're thinking about how to bring creativity to get you unstuck, or kind of to move you through a season of like where you're kind of pushing up against the edge of things?
Absolutely. And I love that you brought those examples because writing is definitely one of my favorite forms of expression, hence the Substack and everything. But I learned early on that not all writing needs to be public, to your point. Not everything needs to be public. And something that took me aback when I was doing a writing workshop some years ago was that we don't even realize how much we are censoring within ourselves
Yes.
until we do some writing in private that nobody's going to read but yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard for us to even admit that. It certainly was the case for me until I did one of these timed writings. And the thing with the timed writing, so for example, I love these prompts. I have some prompts that
Yes.
I love to use. So, and they're very short. It's nothing too ornate or complex. My favorite one is if only.
Yeah.
If only dot dot dot, right? And
Yeah.
you put a timer for 10 minutes and you just write. And the goal is for your like your monkey mind, your critical mind,
Yeah.
that inner critic, it's to outpace it. So in those
Yeah.
10 minutes, the goal is for you to not stop moving your hand. Just keep moving, keep writing. Doesn't have no grammar, no punctuation, is just a release of what wants to come out. And when you write like that, and you have to promise that at the 10-minute mark, you stop,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
also part of it. So honoring those boundaries as well, because sometimes when something people fear is if I start, I won't be able to stop. It'll be overwhelming. It'll consume me. So there's
Yeah.
that fear. And we sometimes don't even realize that fear plays so much into our
Yes.
inability to
Oh,
express, right?
yeah.
So the timer is the container and way in which we respect our own boundaries and we set limits to the experience so that whatever needs to come out in that moment does as it should, right? So being able to set a timer, get that prompt like if only. Another one is the apology, right?
Yeah.
The apology I never got, the apology I wanted to give, the apology I needed, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, today I miss. And it's things that it'll get you thinking of the things that have been inside
Yeah.
maybe needing expression, maybe needing to move through, but you weren't even aware. And another point is that we are taught that so much of emotions and processing grief and difficult experiences in life is from the neck up. So it's all in the mind. It's all therapy, and therapy is very much necessary and
Yes.
part of the process. And you mentioned it earlier. A lot of, let's say, anxiety, for example, feels like buzzing in your chest or in your back or all over your body. So a lot of it is connecting the mind to the rest of our body, which is our, I like to call it our emotion processing machine, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
And writing does that in a very gentle way. You're not out there running. Running is another fabulous way to process, but in this case, through
Yeah.
creativity, through expression, through that release, it's setting that time boundary, giving yourself the space to write, knowing nobody else is going to read it. And then you do with that what you will. You could throw it
Yeah.
away, you could burn it, you could keep it, you could frame it,
Yeah.
whatever it is. You could share it with
I
somebody.
was gonna say, and then there might be a time where you decide to. I certainly have
Yeah.
clients who do writing activities like these on their own, and then decide to bring them to be witnessed, and they want to be
Yeah.
witnessed by me because I'm a safe person to witness it, or they
Yes.
it taught them to discover things. But I think the safety of the timed container, but also the promise to yourself that nobody else needs to see it, really does allow you to access both maybe some of the beliefs that have been are maybe not serving you anymore, but also the
Yes.
possibilities. And there's can be a real catharsis in that.
Right.
A friend of mine offered me, she's an intuitive creative coach. Years ago, I've been working with her for years, and she would have me do these activities where I would write, wouldn't it be wonderful if?
Mm. Yes.
Because so much of us are constantly on the lookout, again, neurobiologically, if we've survived trauma or hard things, we're on the lookout for all the things that are going to go wrong. We're looking out for
Yes.
the evidence of what we can't do, what we can't have, what will go wrong. And wouldn't it be wonderful if allows us in that playful, dreamlike state? Like, what is a possible different future that I couldn't have expected? So maybe we'll play around with that in our next one
Yes.
because it feels like a good theme. Um, I wondered about. I think we've talked about this again offline. Sorry, y'all. We're inside baseball here, but we've talked about before our mutual love of Rosemary Batola Traumer, the
Yes.
incredible poet. Um, who has a new book coming out, by the way, which is going to be amazing, a new book of poetry called Wonderment. But I took a writing workshop with her a while back, and one of the activities she did that I now do in my writing workshops and my creative workshops that I love is asking you to write a poem about a hard time in your life, but asking you to write about it from the third person.
Wow.
And I think that activity is so incredible. Again, when we think about how do we first become aware and then interrupt the sticky stories that are often harsh or limiting, is we're
Mhm.
often much more able to be generous and compassionate and kind to another than we are to ourselves. And I ended up writing this poem from that activity called What Cancer Couldn't Kill, which was great. I was grateful that the Get Griefy magazine published. But it was such an interesting exercise to be a witness to myself in the poetic form, which is its own interesting container and challenge. And
Yes.
that was also a timed activity as well. So I think also approaching your identity story or your sticky stories from a third person point of view is another creative way to play around with noticing with compassion, allowing an alternative truth that it's presumably kinder or nicer or sees, you know,
Yeah.
you might even write a poem like, how would your friends describe you? Like there's something about that third person that, again, it's like shifting the I am. It gives you a little distance between like the negative narratives that many of us have of ourselves. And I love that opportunity to do that.
Yeah. You wouldn't happen to have that handy. I'm putting you on
I
the spot.
don't
Yeah.
have that
Not
poem.
today.
I know I don't have that poem,
We
but
could
I
share it
should have
later.
brought it.
Yeah.
I'll share it later, and maybe we'll share it when we share the replay for this. I think it's amazing. You know, I don't know if there's other. I know I was thinking about today, like I wanted to bring people other activities. Were there others that you wanted to share? I know I have a few in mind, but wanted to make sure you had time to share
Well, I
other ones.
actually wanted to delve a little bit deeper
Yeah,
on that one on the third person perspective because I think that's really, really powerful. It's so interesting how we can be kinder to somebody else than we are to ourselves at times, especially with the way that we got through something. We
yeah,
don't always do ourselves justice with
yeah,
what we needed to do to survive and, honor that version in the way that it needed to because it got us through. And also, where do we go next? So I'm curious, when you were writing that poem, was there something that emerged for you in terms of a realization,
Yeah, yeah,
a different energy of kindness towards yourself, or something else altogether? I'm curious about
yes,
that.
yes. Well, if I would have thought this through, I was looking around to see if I had the print magazine in front of me, but I don't. But yeah, I think one of the things that I discovered, and I think I would be surprised, and we did little group shares in this writing workshop, and so other people shared some of their aha discoveries, and so I think it was pretty universal. But one of the things that I was writing, I wrote about my time going through chemotherapy. I'm recently survived, as you know, breast cancer, and went through chemotherapy, lost my hair, part of my body. You know, many treatments, but chemotherapy was a part of it. And so in my mind, I had a story about myself that, like, I don't recognize myself anymore. I don't even know who I am. I am completely lost. I don't know who this new Lisa is, but she doesn't look or feel anything like the old Lisa. And it was a kind of, lacking, negative, there's nothing of value story. That was kind of the story. I didn't quite realize how much I was holding on to it. Until I wrote about a time when I was waiting in the waiting room for my, who knows, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th chemo round. And somebody came in, there weren't seats available. I offered them my seat. There was an exchange, there was something happened. And the title of the poem ended up being this discovery that I had, because I was watching myself be in the chair, be completely swollen from steroids and the meds and all the things that come with cancer treatment. But I was watching myself have this interaction with this other cancer patient, offering them the chair I had been sitting in, listening to the buzz in the room. And I was able to recognize that even cancer couldn't kill my kindness, which is the name,
Wow.
the title of the poem. And it was like I discovered that cancer could take a lot from me. But the things that I really care most about myself, one of the things that I care most about myself is that I care about other people.
Yes.
And I don't think I would have saw that about myself or about my cancer journey or about my identity as someone coming through cancer treatment, if I hadn't been posed with that creative challenge. And that's the power of a creative prompt.
That is beautiful. I'm very powerful. That is really, really powerful. So thank
Yeah,
you for sharing that. And we will definitely share the poem and with the
yeah,
replay and everything, because it is really powerful. One
yeah,
thing that, along with the writing practices, you asked about another practice that I'm a fan of as well. And that is the second part to writing, should we choose to share it, right? And it's the
yes,
witnessing. So
yeah,
whether we are witnesses to somebody else sharing their story or their writing or their art or whatever form of expression, or we have somebody be a witness for us. And one thing that I learned about being a witness and is there's no response required. There's no chiming into, oh, Lisa, that was a great poem, or blah, blah, blah,
yes,
even if I thought it
yeah,
was the best thing I've ever heard. I think it's really important that when we're witnessing, we, so I'll give it in the form of an example. When I do these workshops with people, one person will be reading what came up for them, the
yeah,
other person will simply listen and
yeah,
will just be there to listen. And they are not allowed to emote with their face. They're not
yeah,
allowed to say anything. They're not even allowed to nod. I'm a big nodder. So, like, I would,
yes, I
just
know.
keep your head still. And the reason for that, it's because they are not, the person showcasing and expressing is not seeking approval or feedback or anything like that. They're just sharing. So the
Yeah,
only thing the other party's allowed to do is um, kind of give popcorn feedback of what stood out to them by repeating the sentence as it was
yeah,
written, let's say in the case of writing. So if I said, the last, I'm still a kind person, right? And that
yeah,
line in the
yeah,
poem stood out, then the other person would say, I'm still a kind person. And they would say it exactly as you wrote it. And I think that's really important, because we think that to be there for somebody else, we have to say this grand thing, or we have to do this grand act, or we have to say these really wise words, when in fact it's just really being attuned to the form
yeah,
of expression that's taking place without
yeah,
judgment. And if anything, and if asked, reflecting back what you heard as you heard
Yeah.
it, because we don't always perceive things that the way that they're meant. And sometimes the person sharing is not even sure how the other person received it. So it's really nice to see how the other person received it. That's one of my favorites. But
Yeah.
I would love to
I love
know
that.
about some of yours as well.
Well, I love that. And I think, you're getting into creativity certainly can be a solo individual effort, but it's always interesting. It's why, and you do this too, it's why I like to put on workshops and retreats and community gatherings, because I think there's something alchemical
Yes.
about the sort of interplay of different people being creative, being witness. My senior thesis and much of my work and my writing has been around holding space and bearing witness. And so I appreciate that. Like, it's not good job. It's I see you
See.
exactly as you are. So I love that, and I love the interplay of again, it's not because the good job is like, oh, now we're back to creativity is about outcome and production versus creativity being about discovery. And so I
Yes.
think when you kind of set up parameters or rules like that, you make it a safer space for people to be in a space of playful discovery or creative exploration versus production. And that's its whole other thing. We've touched on a couple of things: timed writing, third person poetry, kind of some of the beautiful writing prompts that you said. I wanted to come back around to two that are one's kind of more playful and fun, one's just a kind of everyday practice you can incorporate in your life. One is, some of us, I mean, I love to swear, thus the title of my book and podcast, Grief is a Sneaky Bitch, but some of us might have grown up with like a swear jar in our house, or we might have one for our kids. So I've played around at seasons of my life, and I've asked clients to do this, to come up with a sticky word jar. And so you can play around if you're trying to work on, if you're in a stuck place of your life, or you're noticing that you're feeling, really constrained in the season of change, or you're really not feeling like yourself, is to start being on the lookout for those sticky words: the should, shouldn't, never, always, but. And then every time you catch yourself saying one of those words to somebody, I'm always depressed, I'm never chosen, I am, I shouldn't take the day off, whatever the thing is, you put whatever whatever coin, dollar bill, whatever you got in a jar. And then at the end of the week, take yourself to go get some creative product, paper, crayons, pencils, paint, yarn, whatever is your jam, and go take yourself on an art date, and let that art date be a place where you do some of the other activities that we've been talking about. Drawing, what does your feeling look like? Drawing the world in which you want to be living in, or, something beautiful and creative. Again, it doesn't have to be for a production, it's about the experience. So that's kind of like a silly one. It's a play on the swear jar. I call it the sticky jar. Um,
But I
you
love
know,
that because it's creating that awareness that
yes,
we truly do not even realize when we're seeing the thing, when we're creating sticky stories for ourselves in the moment. We don't even see it
yes,
sometimes. So it's just creating that awareness. And I say, just it's a big deal. It's a big deal in how we speak to ourselves, how we
yes,
think, how we reframe. And those absolute terms that help, that make us
yes,
see life as like this or that and black and white, up or down, that kind of
yes,
stuff. That really helps to shift and empower us to tell ourselves different stories, especially when we need them most. So I think
yeah.
it's a fun exercise, and I love
It's a
that you did
fun
a play on that.
exercise. Yeah. I've also done a play that's almost the flip side. So if somebody's worked on that for a while and they've gotten to where I can even see in session that they're catching themselves and they're replacing like should or shouldn't with like I can, or I'm allowed to, or they're replacing but with and. Then I invite them to play with like doing the jar, but when you're rewarding, like how often are you catching yourself reframing? Like, I'm not bad. Actually, I just said that I was bad at it, but I'm not bad at it. I just don't have a lot of practice. It's like, okay,
Yes.
but also reward yourself for becoming the kind of person who's noticing the power of how you talk about yourselves and what it allows you to see or not see. And I think that sort of leads me to like a more practical or written version of that. When I call it like freeze reframe, like freeze tag. You remember that game?
Mhm.
The sort of freeze reframe, which is like, again, pick yourself a timed prompt and just write down your thoughts about what's you would label going wrong in your life, what's not working, what's going wrong in your life, all the criticisms, all the worries you have. Just like, again, free form, nobody's going to see it. What's wrong in my life is blah, 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 blah.
The one
Write it
that's
all out, which for a lot of us, once we get started, we know we got some things we could say. But then I
yes,
invite people to go back and rewrite, not to deny or erase that maybe hard things are happening. Maybe you have a cancer diagnosis. Maybe somebody you love just died. Maybe you lost your job. But just to create some space. So every time you see, and this is what we were talking about earlier in our conversation today, I am depressed, or I am a bad mom, or I am always, never, etc. Try replacing it with something a little softer. So I notice anxiety is showing up a lot lately. Today, depression is really at a 10. Maybe give yourself a scale. Like
yeah,
depression really feels like a 10 today, and it felt like a 1 yesterday. And that little bit of distance, again, this writing exercise, but then going and correcting yourself. So most of what we do when we don't write it down is we just have a free for all with the first part of this exercise. It's just like,
right.
here's all the things that are wrong, and I can tell you without even thinking about it. And it just becomes the story we tell. So this exercise causes us, and we do the 10 minutes of writing everything's wrong, and 10 minutes, don't put your pen down, of practicing reframing, giving a little distance,
Yes,
finding, that there's maybe not a total capital T truth about that it's today, or that, and looking for the unique outcomes or the exception stories. You could even do that on the end side. So like, what might be some counter truths or some experiences that you've had that are in narrative therapy, what we call unique outcomes or exception stories, but that kind of cut at this idea that everything is bad all the time in your life.
yes,
So you purposely spend 10 minutes looking for, some people might call it a gratitude practice, which I feel neither here nor there about. It's more about, what am I paying attention to? It's just building the muscle. It's a practice,
yes,
building the muscle. And this is a creative way to do it. So you sort of have all the things that are wrong. That's this list. Then you have the practicing, like the reframing. Instead of I am, I'm feeling, I'm experiencing, I'm noticing. And then you have this sort of third page, if you think about it, which is the things that you're noticing that are positive, neutral, maybe on a upward trajectory. Like maybe I used to cry or feel I couldn't get out of bed every day, and I noticed this last week, actually there were 3 days where I really enjoyed going for a walk around the block. Because again, it doesn't take away from the fact that hard things are happening in your life. It just allows you to see that other things are true too. And that's what allows us to begin to shift our stories. Because when we can see that a different experience of the world is possible, we're more likely to go out and look for the evidence that different ways of being in the world is possible. It has a kind of very self fulfilling
yes.
prophecy. Yeah.
And that was powerful. That's absolutely powerful. And just noticing that evidence, I think, is something very underrated. And
Yeah.
these practices help with that. One example that I'll give is I have a very loud, mouthy inner critic. She's tough.
Yes. Yes.
And I learned that this same loudness and strength and boisterous nature can have a different, effect if I let it, right? So I often say, okay, well, it's telling me, oh, you're not good at this, or why are you even doing this, or whatever. What might the other side of that statement look like and sound like?
Yes.
And I say, if you're able to tell me these things, inner critic,
Yes.
what might something a little bit gentler, kinder, more supportive, more empowering look like? Because it's the same energy. What does this other side of it look like? And in the kind of collecting evidence is the way I like to frame it, in the collecting evidence that something else is possible, that something is shifting, that we are changing. One practice that I like is I have in my notes in my iPhone, in my notes section of my phone, just moments that where I notice something shifting, and I just add a little entry like, today I enjoyed 10 extra minutes with my cup of coffee and I felt really nice about it. Like something so
Yes.
tiny. And I write it down. And today I noticed such and such thing. Today this happened. Today. And by the end of the week, you notice that it's not just one thing, it's like 20 things. And then
Yeah.
the week after that, it's 50 things, right? So it's collecting evidence that that life changes,
Yes.
in both directions, and it's
Yeah.
possible to shift the way that what we see, how we
Yes.
perceive things, and the way in which we shift our own stories. So that's one of my favorite ones.
I love that so much, Nina, because the truth is, and I've said this from stages, and I'm sure I said it's some version of it in our first live of this summer shift series. Is the stories we tell impact what we pay attention to, and they impact the quality of our lives, what we can expect from the world and what we can't expect from the world. So you making this practice, or as I say, building this
Mhm.
musculature to notice neutral things or even positive things actually begins to fundamentally shift the story. And that shifted story means you have a new lens in which you're
Mhm.
viewing the world, and it will become easier to notice those things. And also, the more we notice the things that are neutral or light, that allows us to the courage to be with the hard things. So this isn't about, again, escaping or denying the hard emotions and the hard experiences that you might be going through when you're, those of you who are watching us today, that you might be going through. All it does is allows us to be able to be with the truth of the variability, of the uncertainty. I mean, the only certain thing is that things will change, right?
Yes.
So that practice that you just shared with us is such a valuable practice. And again, you don't need a journal. You have your notes app. You can leave yourself a voice memo if you want to
Yes.
do it. I also like, but back just, I know we're getting to our time of closing, but another way that I've used a version of that practice, this is another creative approach to beginning to shift the stories. I always believe in having what an old colleague of mine used to refer to as an accountability buddy, so an accountability partner, accountability buddy. So I also have had seasons with certain friends where we've both agreed that we were in a place where we really stuck in our lives and the stories we would tell. We were having a hard time seeing beauty or joy or delight, and so we sort of committed for a period of time to send each other a voice memo or a photo. Usually we tried to do like something visual. So capture a photo of something that brought you delight or wonder or joy today. You didn't even have to say anything. And we would just have basically, if you look back in our text history, there would just be an exchange of something beautiful, something silly, something funny, something. Also doing some of these practices with, if you can go to one of Neil's workshops or my workshops, and someday the two of us are going to host a workshops together. But if you have a friend who's also maybe in a season of their life, try and don't make it endless because then it feels too overwhelming. So, like, hey, about every day this week, can we promise to do this?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's beautiful. And that's a
yeah,
powerful, again, you having that witness without
yeah,
much explanation or context. Like you just get it.
yeah,
This was a moment. That's
yeah. This is a
beautiful.
moment in our day. So, you want to tell folks about our next?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. So
yeah,
the
great.
next event, this would be the third of the series, as we mentioned at the beginning. That one is going to be September 9th, same time, same place. It'll be here on Substack. And the idea is to meet life differently. So how after loss, it could be difficult to trust the unexpected. I think it was Stephen said something in the beginning about learning to be with the unknown and be okay with it, as it's not a threatening thing, it's a safe thing. So, life has a way of inviting us forward in ways that we could have never planned. What does that look like in your life? How do we make space for wonderment, for surprises, for the unknown in a way that feels safe, if you will, or welcoming, or something that we can do to move forward? So, that'll be the last one in this series. That'll be September 9th, and we hope you can join us there.
Yeah, Nina, thanks for being such an amazing conversation partner and colleague
Thank
and
you.
friend. And thanks for those of you who joined us live and for those of you who are watching us on the replay. We hope you will try out some of these activities, try to play with the sticky stories in your life. And we, of course, would love to hear from you. We'll post this on our Substack pages so you can watch the replay. I'll share my poem, I promise. But we'd love to hear from you about what you're playing around with and what are you trying. And we look forward to seeing you in September.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been amazing.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.